Hello, today I'm going to do my weekly wrap up. I managed to read 2 adult books and 1 child's book, which I was actually really happy and impressed about, so I'm just going to get straight into the reviews. First up, I read Suicide Notes by Micheal Thomas Ford. It's about a 15-year-old boy who wakes up in a mental hospital and is told you tried to commit suicide, and each chapter is a different day. So he's on this program, I think it's 43 days, and so for 43 days before you come out you have to tell us why you tried to commit suicide and all that different stuff, and it's all the supposed to be the logistics of a mental hospital. You also meet the other people who are staying there who are also like him, suicidal, and you realise their reasons behind that, and you kind of get to know them. I really wanted to like this book, but I absolutely hated it. I really did. Another thing within it is dealing with homosexuality as a teenager. That's like a big thing within the plot as well, and I just hated it all. I don't feel like it was well done. I wanted to love it. I feel like it was unrealistic, and that was what the big thing was for me. The boy was realistic at first. He was kind of very similar to the boy out of We Need to Talk About Kevin. When Kevin's a teenager, he is horrible, like this really horrible, spiteful, sarcastic boy, and that's what he was, and that was fine. I was completely fine with that character. I don't believe you have to like the main character to like a book. So I was like, oh, that's fine. And then halfway through, I feel like the author went, shit, no one's going to care what happens about him. We need to make him likeable. But it wasn't in keeping with his character. It didn't make sense. So I didn't like that. So they were in a mental hospital, and there were bits in it where he was like, okay, we've got half an hour and no one's looking at the ward because they've gone over, all the security have gone over to the adult ward, so they left us unattended. We've got half an hour. And I was kind of like, that doesn't happen in mental hospitals. If you're working in a mental hospital with people who are suicidal, these people have 24/7 surveillance. So all those scenes, which were a lot of scenes, couldn't have happened. So straight away you had to cross those scenes off because that's just not realistic. There's someone watching CCTV, there's someone patrolling. That's what these environments are like. Highly secure, especially if you're dealing with people who are still suicidal, as the people were within this book. So I found that just mental fantasy. I thought it was a mess. I have to be honest, the whole book I thought was a mess, and I thought it wasn't very sensitive to the subject. If you want a good book about mental health and about a mental hospital, Susan Kayson's Girl Interrupted, it's one of my favourite books. It's so good. Susan actually spent time in a mental hospital, and she wrote this book about her time in there, and it's about, you meet all the different characters, you really go into it. It's a really harsh book, so there's certain stuff that happens in it which is very, very shocking. It's not for the faint-hearted at all, but it's realistic, and that's why I loved it. And in this, a big part is something called checks. So what they do in mental hospitals is they check you 24/7. So they'll check you haven't got anything on you, check that you're where you're supposed to be, check your behaviour, continual surveillance. And it gets to the point where it irritates her in this book. They're constantly being watched. It's like kind of being in jail. But that's what it is like in a mental hospital. They have to make sure that you aren't going to do something to yourself. So that's why this was so unrealistic. I just despised this. I felt it was a lazy attempt to write about suicide. I felt like there wasn't enough research gone into the running of a mental hospital to write about it properly, and I hated it. Don't read this, but read this. I then read the children's book Goggle-eyes by Anne Fine. This is about a girl talking about her relationship with her stepdad. So I felt the way it was told was very clever, and the circumstances in which she was telling you the story was very clever. And she's just going from the beginning of when she first met him right the way up to current day, and how they had a rocky start, and it's about how it's difficult to have a step parent and all the different stuff that comes with that. I thought it was a good book. There was really good bits within it. It also talked about her and her mum do protests against nuclear power points and power stations, and it kind of went into more detail about that. I felt altogether it was a good book, but I really didn't like the stepdad's character. I didn't like him as a person, but I feel like the book did still work. I wasn't wowed by it or anything like that. He was one of these characters that he was slightly older and very kind of stuck in his ways, and he stayed stuck in his ways even at the end. He didn't compromise, he just kind of stayed he thought he was right and couldn't compromise, but also couldn't have a discussion about things. Everything had to turn into an argument of him kind of dictating what he felt. And his one main point was that he was reliable. But I feel like you have to have more good characters to you than just being reliable. That's not a very well-rounded person if the only thing you like about someone is that they're reliable. You know, you have to have compassion and be able to compromise with different stuff. But overall, I did think it was a good book. It was okay. And lastly, I read a thriller called 12. This is by McDonell, and it's about the drug scene in New York. But it's not the drug scene that you would suspect. It's about all the very like middle class to upper class, privileged white children that take drugs on the New York scene. You know, they're among the most richest people within the world because they have like massive townhouses in the middle of New York City with like libraries and massive rooms. So they're very privileged and they are very well connected, and it's about the drug scene with them. I thought this was very interesting. How it was told is it started on the 27th of December and it ended on New Year's Eve. So when it first starts, you know there's going to be a party on New Year's Eve. So everything is gradually creeping towards that. Every chapter is told by a different person. Some people have multiple chapters, and there's a character called White Mike in it who is kind of about him the most. He's the drug dealer. When you were reading it, you felt like you were on drugs, which sounds very odd, but it was the way it was written. It was written in a way to make you feel like you were on ecstasy. Like kind of, then this happened, then that happened, then that happened, just quick kind of pace, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic. The reason it's called 12 is because there's this new drug called 12, but 12 is basically just the same as ecstasy. That's what it kind of is like. But when you read about drug addicts and different stuff, you imagine them to be people who have had really hard lives, who don't have a lot of money. But when you put it in this situation, you're kind of like, these kids have a lot of money. They're not having to do stuff to like get the money to get drugs and, you know, steal off people so that they can have enough money to get their hit. That's not happening in this book. Whereas in a book like Trainspotting by Irvine Welsh, that is happening. Because they're rich kids, they have massive allowances. They can have as much drugs as they want. I thought it was a really good book, really well put together. I don't think I've read a book this fast paced ever. Loved it. And that's it, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed these reviews, and I will see you in a week's time for next week's reviews. I'm hoping to get to some graphic novels next week, but we'll see what happens, and I hope you have a great week. Fruit Loops. Fruit Loops. I was really happy to.